I don't think a lot of veterans actually are devastated. The reality is, if you go deeper into Invictus, a lot of veterans are actually more upset, asking where all the money actually goes to.
Harry and Meghan are having a conniption fit over these reveals. You know how they release parts of a book throughout certain media entities?
Yeah.
Like right before they come out to tease it. Well, the Times is getting all of the best Tom Bauer bits for Betrayal.
You know, my jaw dropped this week when Time magazine announced that Prince Harry was one of its Time 100 most influential leaders in sport, which I thought was hilarious.
Bauer suggests that the 2025 Games in Canada were overshadowed by Meghan Markle's public appearances, referring to the event as the Meghan Games. He cites Canadian executives who allegedly felt Meghan was a distraction and that her presence was more about bling than veteran rehabilitation.
A project once praised for putting wounded veterans back in the spotlight is now facing a wave of uncomfortable questions. And at the centre of the growing controversy are Prince Harry, Meghan Markle, major sponsors, disputed spending claims, and a government document containing a redacted section that has left critics demanding more answers. The Invictus Games have long been viewed as one of Prince Harry's most important achievements. Created to support wounded, injured, and sick service members and veterans, the event was meant to give competitors a platform where their courage, recovery, and personal stories came first. But royal biographer Tom Bauer is now pushing a much darker interpretation of what allegedly happened behind the scenes. In his book Betrayal, Bauer raises serious allegations about Harry and Meghan's involvement with the Invictus Games and argues that the public image surrounding the event may not tell the full story.
Invictus Games began with a profoundly noble mission to use sport to help recovery for wounded veterans. But lately, the math isn't mathing on their mission and the way that they run their foundation and program.
These are Bauer's claims and interpretations, not proven facts, but they have still triggered fresh debate about whether the original mission of the Games has slowly been overshadowed by celebrity attention and controversy. The whole point of Invictus was supposed to be the veterans. Many competitors have faced injuries and major life changes that can affect their careers, relationships, and emotional well-being. The Games offered them a chance to compete again, rebuild confidence, connect with others who understood their struggles, and show the world that their stories were about strength and recovery, rather than simply what they had lost. That is exactly why the latest criticism has hit such a nerve. According to Bauer, the attention surrounding the Games gradually shifted away from the competitors and toward Harry and Meghan.
He's made several highly critical claims regarding the Invictus Games, which we're checking out today, describing them as having become a vehicle for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's personal brand, rather than focusing on veterans, which I can say as a royal reporter, Scott, is something that I hear every Invictus Games, that there are some competitors that feel like Harry and Meghan suck all of the oxygen out of the room and it's not about them.
Bauer pointed out in his book during an absurd wheelchair basketball game, one team didn't even need wheelchairs while the other team did. It was America versus Nigeria. Nigeria needed the wheelchairs, and after the game, the Americans all stood up, got out of their wheelchairs, and walked off. It's absurd. But also there was no one in attendance.
He suggests that as the event became more famous, media coverage increasingly focused on the couple's appearances, public image, and personal projects instead of the veterans themselves. And this is where things get messy. Critics have questioned whether Meghan's highly publicised appearances brought useful attention to the Games or created an unnecessary distraction. Her clothing choices, public appearances, and business ventures often became major stories of their own. Instead of discussing the competitors and their achievements, headlines sometimes focused on what Meghan was wearing, where she appeared, and what she might be promoting next. Bauer takes that criticism even further. He alleges that Meghan used the visibility surrounding Invictus to strengthen her own public profile and support her commercial ambitions. Again, that is his argument, and it remains disputed commentary rather than an established fact.
A growing scandal
involving Prince Harry and his last remaining genuine charity project, the Invictus Games. But is it really a charity project? Invictus funds were directed towards private jets, 5-star hotels, and transportation for Harry and Meghan.
Still, the allegation has become a major part of the wider debate over whether the couple's celebrity status has helped the Games reach a larger audience or pulled attention away from the people the event was created to honour. Then came another problem: sponsors. Reports of major companies ending or changing their involvement have raised questions about the long-term financial health of the organisation. A sponsor leaving does not automatically mean something improper happened, and partnerships can end for many ordinary business reasons.
He's having a lot of issues. So I did write a piece this week, it was an exclusive, about how there are funding issues for Vancouver. So we know he is going to Birmingham this summer to prep for the games next year. And one of the reasons he's going is because he needs money.
Recent information about the Invictus Games Foundation and its Endeavor Fund have come to light and are painting a really bad picture of the situation.
But when those departures are placed alongside questions about spending, leadership, and the public role of Harry and Meghan, critics say the situation deserves closer examination. And the most mysterious part may be the government paperwork. A publicly discussed document reportedly contains a redacted section connected to funding and financial arrangements surrounding the Games. The hidden information has led to speculation about what exactly was removed from public view and why. A redaction alone does not prove misconduct, but when money, public institutions, and a major international event are involved, unanswered questions can quickly become a much bigger controversy. Now the pressure is building because the debate is no longer just about Harry and Meghan's popularity. It is about whether the Invictus Games can protect its original mission while dealing with celebrity attention, sponsor concerns, financial questions, and growing public scrutiny. Prince Harry and the Invictus Games Foundation have strongly pushed back against the criticism surrounding Tom Bower's book, arguing that his portrayal of the organisation is unfair and misleading. But the response has not ended the controversy. If anything, the dispute has encouraged even more people to examine the claims, the financial records, and the public documents connected to the event.
Oh, the Invictus Games, it's great. It does all this. And then, you start looking into it and you're like, hey, what the heck is going on here? Those 535 competitors had to pay their own way. They had to pay their own housing for the games. They had to pay for their own equipment. And Harry and Meghan got a really nice vacation out of it with lots of adorational speeches and clapping and crowds gathered for
the foundation's highest paid staff earned between £120,000 and £130,000 above typical UK charity sector norms. Other interesting things of note: legal fees jumped from £45,000 to £155,000 with no explanation given. Deferred income ballooned fourfold from £431,000 to £1.799 million. An American for-profit company called June's LLC, with no description of purpose, received nearly £30,000 in 2023 and nothing in 2024. And the same filing contains two different company registration numbers, one on the cover page and another.
One reason Bower's allegations attracted so much attention is that he says he did not simply investigate the Invictus Games from behind a desk. According to his account in Betrayal, he personally attended the Games in Vancouver and observed parts of the event for himself. He later used those experiences to support his wider criticism of Harry and Meghan's role within the organisation. Bower alleges that money connected to Invictus was used to cover expensive travel, luxury hotels, and private transportation involving Harry and Meghan. These remain allegations presented by Bower, and they should not be treated as established facts. However, claims involving spending are always going to attract attention when an organisation is closely connected to veterans, charitable work, government support, and public money. He also claims that people working around the event were expected to address Meghan as ma'am and Harry as sir. Bower went so far as to describe the Vancouver event as the Meghan Games, arguing that media attention surrounding Meghan had become so dominant that the competitors themselves were being pushed into the background. That description is clearly Bauer's opinion, but it raises a larger question. How much attention should public figures receive when they represent an event that was created to celebrate the competitors?
And how they're playing with the veteran money, because they're getting a lot of funding from countries and places to get this, what would typically be veteran support income, that then goes to putting on the Invictus Games. Now, again, I'm not trying to be, belittling what the Invictus Games is trying to do, but I am asking the question of, is it really the best use of veteran funding? Why can't Harry get his own funding? Why is he relying on all these countries to do it?
Then the controversy moved beyond one author's book. A researcher named Rachel Maxwell reportedly began examining financial records and government documents connected to the 2025 Invictus Games. According to the claims circulating around her research, one particular agreement quickly became the centre of attention. The document involved funding arrangements between the Canadian government and organisers connected to the Vancouver and Whistler Games. When the agreement became publicly available, people started examining the details. And that is when they noticed something strange. One section of the document had reportedly been redacted, meaning important information was hidden from public view. That alone does not prove that anything improper happened. Governments regularly redact information for legal, commercial, security, and privacy reasons. But because public funding was involved, critics immediately wanted to know what information had been removed and why it was considered necessary to keep those details confidential. The hidden section reportedly involved parts of the event's operating budget and licensing arrangements. That detail became especially important because questions were already being raised about spending connected to the games. If taxpayer money was being used to support the event, critics argued that the public had a legitimate interest in understanding where the money was going and what financial obligations were included in the agreement. This is where the situation became much more complicated. Bauer had already made allegations about luxury travel and expensive accommodations.
But people are a little upset about where the money is going because right now there's been a 63% drop in actual grants to wounded warriors, despite the fact that they have more money in their bank than ever from carryover. And in Vancouver, they brought in, it was around $62 million.
Not bad.
50% of that was from the government of Canada and BC, meaning that was taxpayer.
From Meg Yacht Grifter, who is now calling on a boycott of the Invictus Games, saying there is something not sitting right with this charity. Charities that have something to hide should not be trusted, especially with so much NGO fraud being exposed in the last few years. And they are calling on Boeing and American Airlines to think twice before donating.
Then outside researchers began examining government records and discovered information that was not fully visible to the public. The two developments were separate, and a redacted document does not automatically prove Bauer's allegations. Still, the timing created the kind of situation that keeps public suspicion alive. The biggest issue is transparency. Supporters of Harry and the Invictus Games Foundation may argue that critics are connecting unrelated details and turning ordinary administrative decisions into something scandalous. Critics, however, believe an organisation receiving government support should provide clear answers whenever questions about spending appear. And now the focus is shifting toward one simple question. What exactly was contained inside that hidden section, and why did officials decide the public should not be allowed to see it? Once public funding entered the conversation, the pressure for clear answers became much stronger. Critics argued that if taxpayer money was helping support the event, then the public had every right to understand how those funds were being managed and what financial obligations were hidden inside the redacted section. The unanswered questions quickly started piling up. Why was that specific part of the agreement removed from public view? Was the information hidden because of ordinary commercial confidentiality, or was there something more controversial in the financial details? There was no confirmed evidence that the redaction proved wrongdoing, but the lack of a clear explanation gave critics plenty to talk about.
People are a little upset about where the money is going because right now there's been a 63% drop in actual grants to wounded warriors, despite the fact that they have more money in their bank than ever from carryover. And in Vancouver.
In comparison, the US Warrior Games, a similar competition for wounded American service members, runs on roughly $2 million a year. Germany's Invictus-style competition costs about $200,000 and involves half as many participants. The public's taxes footed a portion of the bill.
Then, according to accounts circulating about the investigation, something unexpected happened. Only a few hours after people began examining the document, the Invictus Canada website reportedly became unavailable. When access later returned, researchers claimed the document could no longer be found in the same place. Instead, users attempting to reach certain files were reportedly directed toward a Dropbox login page. Critics argued that this made previously accessible information more difficult to examine and potentially allowed greater control over who was requesting access to the files. Again, a website going offline or a document being moved does not prove anyone was trying to hide information. Websites experience technical problems, documents get reorganized, and organizations change how files are stored for many ordinary reasons. But the timing was enough to create another wave of suspicion. Think about how this looked from the outside. First, researchers discovered a government agreement containing a redacted financial section. Then questions started spreading about what information had been hidden. Only hours later, the website reportedly went dark, and when access returned, the document was no longer available in the same way. That sequence of events gave critics another reason to keep digging. And what they began examining next was potentially even more important: the financial reports connected to the Invictus Games Foundation. According to interpretations of publicly available financial records, the organization reportedly received more money than it had during the previous reporting period. Normally, increased funding might sound like good news for an organization created to support wounded, injured, and sick service members and veterans. But critics noticed something they believed deserved closer attention. Despite the reported increase in overall income, the amount of money allocated to organizations directly supporting injured veterans was said to have decreased. Some observers also argued that direct spending on veteran-related programs appeared to remain relatively stable, instead of rising alongside the organization's increased financial resources. At the same time, other areas of spending reportedly moved in the opposite direction. Executive compensation increased, cash reserves grew, legal expenses also reportedly climbed. None of those expenses automatically proves financial misconduct. Charities need employees, professional services, legal support, and reserves to continue operating responsibly.
Two effing grifters.
Publicly claims that 92% of every pound spent goes towards charitable activities, a figure that technically falls within UK Charity Commission guidelines. But the term charitable activities includes the cost of running the games themselves, not direct grants or services to veterans.
However, critics argue that when an organisation receives more funding while the proportion directed toward its central mission appears to decline, questions about priorities are unavoidable. And this is where the controversy becomes bigger than Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The real issue is whether the organisation's financial decisions still reflect the mission that made the Invictus Games respected in the first place. Supporters may argue that running a growing international event requires larger budgets, professional staff, legal protection, and long-term financial planning. Critics see it differently. They want to know why increased funding did not appear to produce a comparable increase in direct support for veterans. They also want clearer explanations about rising administrative expenses and growing financial reserves. Because when an organisation is built around wounded veterans, every major spending decision is going to face serious public attention. And with questions about redacted documents, disappearing files, and changing financial priorities all appearing at the same time, the demands for transparency are only getting louder. The financial questions were already creating enough pressure. But then another problem entered the picture: sponsor confidence. When large companies and governments begin changing their financial commitments, every decision gets examined closely, especially when an organization is already facing public criticism. One of the biggest names connected to the Invictus Games was Boeing. The company had been presented as an important corporate supporter of the event, making its reported sponsorship departure a major talking point. Some commentators quickly tried to connect Boeing's decision to the controversy surrounding Tom Bauer's book. The timing gave critics an easy reason to speculate. However, there is no clear evidence that Boeing ended its involvement because of Betrayal, Harry, Meghan, or any of the allegations discussed in the book. Corporate sponsorship agreements can end for many reasons, including changing budgets, new marketing strategies, internal business decisions, or the completion of an existing partnership. Still, when a major sponsor steps away while an organization is facing questions about finances and transparency, the public is naturally going to pay attention. And Boeing was not the only concern. Reports also emerged that the Australian government would not move forward with a previously discussed funding commitment worth millions of dollars connected to the Invictus Games. According to accounts surrounding the decision, senior figures within the organisation reportedly received very little warning before the government budget announcement became public. That created an entirely different problem.
The government in Australia has axed funding for Invictus Australia from this year's federal budget, as the organisation's chief executive has urged the government to reconsider this decision. This is all sort of happening just as we speak, as we go to filming. Now, I've spoken to sources close to Harry, and of course they're shocked. They say, they're blindsided by this, as was the organisation in Australia.
Government funding decisions are complicated, and a cancelled or changed commitment does not automatically mean officials have lost confidence in the Invictus Games. Budgets change, priorities shift, and public spending proposals can disappear for reasons that have nothing to do with controversy. But once again, the timing looked terrible from the outside. A major corporate sponsor was no longer involved. Government funding plans had reportedly changed, financial questions were spreading, and then another development added even more pressure when a member of the Invictus Games Foundation board reportedly stepped down. There is no confirmed evidence that these events were directly connected. Still, critics began looking at the pattern instead of each development separately. One sponsor leaving could be ordinary business. One government changing its funding plans could be a political or budget decision. One board member stepping down could happen for personal or professional reasons. But when all of these developments appear close together, people start asking whether the organisation is facing a deeper confidence problem. That concern becomes even more important when looking toward Birmingham and the 2027 Invictus Games. Reports have suggested that organisers have faced challenges attracting major corporate sponsorship commitments for the event. Hosting an international competition is expensive, and strong financial backing is essential for venues, transportation, staffing, security, media operations, and the many other costs involved in running an event of this size. But without enough major sponsors, the pressure can shift toward governments, smaller partners, donors, and the organisation's own financial resources. And that brings the controversy back to the questions raised earlier. If critics are already examining financial reserves, administrative spending, legal expenses, and the amount of money reaching veteran-related programs, then difficulty securing new sponsorship creates another layer of uncertainty.
Yeah, Australia has done a U-turn. They had previously cut funding for the Invictus Games, but now veteran backlash has forced them to bring it back. But I want to break this down because I'm not buying it, okay? Australian government has reversed its decision to cut funding for Prince Harry's Invictus Australia charity, with Veterans Affairs Minister Matt Keogh announcing that federal support will continue for another 3 years. As part of establishing the new Veterans and Families Wellbeing, we're transitioning funding for broader well-being support. Sounds wise. To the veteran community, to that new agency. As we transition, in order to maintain continuity and certainty of support services for our veteran community, we're providing another 3 years of funding to
None of these developments alone proves that the Invictus Games are collapsing or that Harry and Meghan are responsible for the organisation's financial challenges. But taken together, they create a difficult public image. The organisation is dealing with allegations from a high-profile author, questions about transparency, disputed interpretations of financial records, changes involving sponsors and government funding, leadership departures, and uncertainty surrounding future fundraising. For Prince Harry, that is a serious challenge because Invictus has remained one of the strongest parts of his public legacy. And if confidence from sponsors, governments and supporters continues to weaken, the biggest question may no longer be about one controversial book. It may be whether the organisation can stabilise its finances, rebuild trust, and keep the veterans at the centre of the games while the scrutiny keeps growing. And now we reach one of the most controversial figures being discussed in this entire situation: the reported cost of the 2025 Invictus Games in Vancouver and Whistler. According to figures cited by critics, the event involved a budget of roughly $63.2 million Canadian dollars and brought together more than 500 competitors. That has led some commentators to calculate an average cost of well over 100,000 Canadian dollars per competitor. But that comparison needs context. The total cost of hosting a major international event cannot simply be divided by the number of competitors and treated as money spent directly on each individual.
Paula reports the next Invictus Games are scheduled for Birmingham in 2027. The UK government has committed up to £26 million in public funds, despite the city effectively declaring bankruptcy in 2023. It only exited that status in February of this year. With roughly 15 months to go, Birmingham has just 11 unnamed sponsors contributing an estimated £4 million combined.
And when you're dealing with taxpayer monies, people are kind of like, hey, why are we not buying prosthetics?
Right. And more importantly, you're right, are the wounded warriors getting this money that they deserve?
Large events involve venues, staff, transportation, accessibility requirements, technology, ceremonies, security, accommodation, and many other operational expenses. Still, critics believe the overall cost deserves closer examination. They have compared Invictus spending with other veteran sporting events, including the Warrior Games in the United States, and questioned why the reported budgets appear so different. Those events are not identical in scale, structure, funding, or international reach, so a direct comparison can be misleading. But the contrast has still become another major talking point for people demanding more financial transparency. And behind all those numbers is the issue that matters most: the veterans. Critics argue that if tens of millions of dollars are available, the organisation should clearly explain how that spending improves the experience and long-term support of wounded, injured, and sick service members. Some have questioned whether more resources could instead be directed toward practical assistance, such as adaptive equipment, accessible housing, transportation, rehabilitation programs, or other forms of veteran support. Supporters of Invictus may respond that the Games provide benefits that cannot be measured by simply handing competitors money. The event creates community, gives veterans international visibility, encourages recovery through sport, and allows competitors to represent their countries on a global stage. But Tom Bauer continues to push a much more critical argument. According to Bauer, Harry and Meghan gradually became too central to the public image of the Games, while the competitors themselves received less attention than they deserved. Prince Harry and the Invictus Games Foundation have rejected criticism of this kind, arguing that the organisation remains committed to its mission and the veterans it serves. That disagreement is exactly why the controversy refuses to disappear. Critics see sponsor changes, questions about financial records, disputed spending claims, a redacted government document, and reported challenges securing future funding.
But I think with the Santa Bali thing, clearly Harry is tone deaf or too frightened to tell his wife that, look, you are the problem. We need to step back. You know, this has now just become a celebrity thing rather than looking at the true cause, which is to celebrate, honour and really, you know, sort of inspire the veterans. I love them. I think they're, and I'm not just saying that, I genuinely think, wow, you know, when you're fed up, if you watch some of those poor people, and I don't mean poor in a nasty way, but, you know, what they've gone through, and they get up, you think, get on with it. If they can do it, you can. These people are inspirational. All the men and women of Invictus and all those services who have gone through terrible things, you truly are. Of course,
Supporters see an international organisation facing exaggerated criticism while continuing to provide wounded veterans with a major platform. There have also been public calls for greater regulatory scrutiny in the United Kingdom. The Charity Commission can examine registered charities when regulatory concerns justify intervention, but public criticism alone does not prove misconduct or guarantee that a formal investigation will happen. For now, there are still more questions than confirmed answers. Why was part of the government agreement redacted? Why did access to the document reportedly change after researchers began examining it? Are sponsorship developments ordinary business decisions or signs of a wider confidence problem? And most importantly, can the Invictus Games keep the veterans at the centre of the story while public attention remains focused on Harry, Meghan, and the growing controversy? Now we want to hear what you think. Do these developments raise legitimate concerns about transparency and spending, or has the criticism surrounding Harry and Meghan gone too far? Share your opinion in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more celebrity drama and major stories. And before you leave, click the next video appearing on your screen for another celebrity controversy you do not want to miss. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.